Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 6 of our complete practice question series for the SAA-C03 AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate exam. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, explanation, and exam tip. Let us begin part 6. Question number 180. A financial services company exposes a customer API. Seasonal filing periods cause large request spikes, but responses must have consistently low startup latency. The company wants a managed compute platform with minimal infrastructure administration. Which solution best meets the requirements? Option A. Run the API on Amazon EC2 behind an application load balancer. Option B. Run the API on an Amazon EKS cluster behind an application load balancer. Option C. Use API gateway and Lambda with reserved concurrency configured for the function. Option D. Use API gateway and Lambda with provisioned concurrency configured for the function. The correct answer is D. Use API gateway and Lambda with provisioned concurrency configured for the function. Here's why. API gateway and Lambda are managed in scale for seasonal demand. Provisioned concurrency keeps initialized execution environments ready, reducing cold start latency. Why are the other options not correct? A. ECS requires container service and capacity configuration and has more operational overhead. B. EKS adds cluster and Kubernetes administration that the requirement does not justify. C. Reserved concurrency protects and limits capacity, but does not pre-initialize execution environments. Exam tip. Provisioned concurrency reduces Lambda cold starts. Reserved concurrency only reserves and limits capacity. Question number 181. A clinical scheduling platform uses an Amazon RDS for Postgres QLDB instance. Free storage is approaching a critical threshold, and the operations team wants the allocated storage to grow without interrupting database connections or performing repeated manual changes. Which solution meets the requirement with the least operational effort? Option A. Modify the DB instance class to one with more memory and CPU capacity. Option B. Create a snapshot, restore it to a new DB instance with more storage, and redirect the application. Option C. Configure Amazon RDS storage autoscaling with an appropriate maximum storage threshold. Option D. Change the storage type to provisioned IOPS SSD without increasing allocated storage. The correct answer is C. Configure Amazon RDS storage autoscaling with an appropriate maximum storage threshold. Here's why. RDS storage autoscaling monitors available capacity and automatically increases allocated storage before the configured threshold is exhausted. The application continues using the same DB instance. Why are the other options not correct? A. A larger DB instance class increases compute and memory, but does not expand the storage allocation. B. Restoring a replacement instance adds migration work and requires an application cutover. D. Changing the storage type affects input-output characteristics, not the amount of available disk space. Exam tip. Use RDS storage autoscaling when database storage must grow automatically without a replacement DB instance. Question number 182. A cloud advisory firm maintains approved analytics environments for several business units. The firm wants one centrally governed collection of infrastructure solutions that authorized users can launch through self-service, while administrators control the available versions and configurations. Which AWS solution should the firm use? Option A. Package the approved solutions as AWS Service Catalog products and distribute them through portfolios. Option B. Send standalone AWS CloudFormation templates to each business unit for independent deployment. Option C. Create AWS config rules that describe the resources users are permitted to deploy. Option D. Publish AWS Systems Manager documents for users to run as infrastructure templates. The correct answer is A. Package the approved solutions as AWS Service Catalog products and distribute them through portfolios. Here's why. AWS Service Catalog provides managed products, portfolios, version control, and access constraints for standardized self-service infrastructure deployments. Why are the other options not correct? B. CloudFormation provides infrastructure as code, but not the same centrally governed catalog experience. C. AWS Config evaluates resource configuration and compliance. It is not a deployment catalog. D. Systems Manager documents automate operational tasks rather than provide governed infrastructure products. Exam tip. Use AWS Service Catalog when users need approved, reusable AWS solutions through governed self-service. Question number 183. A public records agency must publish several hundred documents on a website. Anyone may read the documents, but no user or administrator must be able to overwrite or delete a document before its legally defined retention date. Which design provides the most secure protection? Option A. Host the files in an S3 website bucket and grant public read permissions through IAM policies. Option B. Keep originals in a private bucket and invoke a Lambda function to restore any modified public object. Option C. Apply an object lock retention date only to the website prefix without enabling S3 versioning. Option D. Enable S3 versioning and S3 object lock in compliance mode, apply the required retention date, and use a bucket policy for public read access. The correct answer is D. Enable S3 versioning and S3 object lock in compliance mode, apply the required retention date, and use a bucket policy for public read access. Here's why. S3 object lock operates on versioned objects. Compliance mode retention prevents protected object versions from being overwritten or deleted until the retention date, while a bucket policy can allow reads. Why are the other options not correct? A. Read permissions do not make objects immutable against identities that retain write or delete privileges. B. Reactive restoration permits an unauthorized change to occur before the function repairs it. C. Object lock requires a versioning-enabled bucket and is applied to object versions, not merely a folder. Exam tip. For fixed-date immutability, combine S3 versioning with object lock retention. Use compliance mode for the strongest protection. Question number 185. An order management service connects to an Aurora MySQL cluster. During a planned writer failover, application clients took several minutes to discard failed connections and reconnect to the new writer. The company wants to shorten future failover disruption with minimal database administration. Which solution should a solutions architect recommend? Option A. Add an elastic cache for Memcached cluster and direct database writes to the cache during failover. Option B. Place Amazon RDS proxy between the application and Aurora and use the proxy endpoint for connections. Option C. Create a second independent Aurora cluster and manually change the application endpoint during failover. Option D. Add more Aurora replicas solely to increase read capacity during the scaling exercise. The correct answer is B. Place Amazon RDS proxy between the application and Aurora and use the proxy endpoint for connections. Here's why. RDS proxy pools database connections and redirects application traffic after an Aurora failover, reducing the time clients spend establishing new connections to the promoted writer. Why are the other options not correct? A. Memcached cannot accept relational database writes or manage Aurora connections. C. A second cluster requires replication planning and manual endpoint changes, increasing operations. D. Additional replicas provide failover candidates and read scale, but do not solve slow client reconnection. Exam tip. Use RDS proxy when connection recovery, rather than database promotion time, causes excessive failover disruption. Question number 186. A payment processor is moving a transactional relational database containing confidential records to AWS. The target service must reduce patching, backup, and infrastructure administration while protecting database files, snapshots, and backups at rest. Which solution best meets these requirements? Option A. Run the database on Amazon EC2 and encrypt only the attached EBS volume with an AWS managed key. Option B. Convert the relational records to S3 objects and use Amazon MAC as the database protection layer. Option C. Migrate the database to Amazon RDS and enable encryption at rest with AWS KMS. Option D. Migrate the database to Amazon RDS and rely on CloudWatch logs to protect stored records. The correct answer is C. Migrate the database to Amazon RDS and enable encryption at rest with AWS KMS. Here's why. Amazon RDS manages common database operations and supports KMS encryption for storage, automated backups, snapshots, and logs, reducing administration while protecting sensitive data at rest. Why are the other options not correct? A. A database on EC2 leaves operating system, engine, patch, backup, and availability tasks with the company. B. S3 and Macy do not provide the transactional relational database behavior required by the workload. D. CloudWatch logs supports observability. It is not an encryption or store data protection control. Exam tip. Choose encrypted Amazon RDS when a relational workload needs managed operations and data at rest protection. Question number 187. A competitive gaming platform exposes TCP and UDP endpoints through network load balancers in several AWS regions. Players are routed with Route 53, but the company needs lower global latency, static entry addresses, and rapid routing away from unhealthy regional endpoints. Which architecture should the company implement? Option A. Place AWS Global Accelerator in front of the regional NLBs and configure listeners for the game ports. Option B. Replace the NLBs with application load balancers and use Route 53 latency-based records. Option C. Put a CloudFront distribution in front of the NLBs and increase the content cache duration. Option D. Expose the game protocol through API Gateway and enable API response caching. The correct answer is A. Place AWS Global Accelerator in front of the regional NLBs and configure listeners for the game ports. Here's why. Global Accelerator accepts TCP and UDP traffic through static Anycast IP addresses and carries it across the AWS global network to healthy NLB endpoints, improving latency and failover behavior. Why are the other options not correct? B. Application load balancers do not support UDP traffic. C. CloudFront accelerates cacheable HTTP-based content and does not proxy arbitrary multiplayer UDP traffic. D. API Gateway is not a transport accelerator for custom TCP and UDP game protocols. Exam tip. Use Global Accelerator for latency-sensitive global TCP or UDP applications with regional load balancer endpoints. Question number 188. A FinOps team is adding AWS spending information to an internal operations dashboard. The dashboard must retrieve cost and usage for the current calendar year through an API and display a forecast for the following 12 months with minimal data pipeline management. Which solution should the team use? Option A. Generate AWS budgets reports and deliver them to the dashboard through SMTP. Option B. Download Cost Explorer CSV reports and upload each report to the dashboard data store. Option C. Configure AWS budgets actions to transfer detailed cost data through FTP. Option D. Call the AWS Cost Explorer API, handling paginated responses for historical and forecast data. The correct answer is D. Call the AWS Cost Explorer API, handling paginated responses for historical and forecast data. Here's why. The Cost Explorer API exposes programmatic cost, usage, and forecast operations. The dashboard can retrieve the required periods directly while following pagination tokens returned by the service. Why are the other options not correct? A. Budget reports are scheduled summaries rather than a programmatic dashboard data source. B. Manual CSV downloads add file handling and do not provide the lowest overhead integration. C. Budgets actions trigger governance responses and do not export detailed datasets through FTP. Exam tip. Use the Cost Explorer API when an application needs programmatic cost, usage, and forecast information. Question number 189. A factory operates a business-critical Microsoft SQL Server standard virtual machine on premises. The disaster recovery target in AWS must provide an RPO of no more than 30 seconds and an RTO under 60 minutes, while keeping continuously running recovery infrastructure to a minimum. Which solution is most cost-effective? Option A. Deploy an active-active SQL Server enterprise architecture between the data center and AWS. Option B. Use AWS Elastic Disaster Recovery to continuously replicate disk changes and launch recovery servers as a pilot light. Option C. Run a warm standby RDS for SQL Server database and use AWS DMS change data capture for replication. Option D. Copy nightly virtual machine backups to Amazon S3 and restore them after a disaster. The correct answer is B. Use AWS Elastic Disaster Recovery to continuously replicate disk changes and launch recovery servers as a pilot light. Here's why. AWS Elastic Disaster Recovery continuously replicates block-level changes to low-cost staging resources and can launch recovery instances within the required RTO, supporting an RPO measured in seconds. Why are the other options not correct? A. An active enterprise edition deployment costs substantially more than the requirement justifies. C. A continuously running database costs more and DMS does not recover the complete application server. D. Nightly backups cannot satisfy either the 30-second RPO or the 60-minute recovery target. Exam tip. Use Elastic Disaster Recovery for low-cost pilot light recovery when workloads require seconds-level RPO and rapid server launch. Question number 190. A research exchange receives thousands of small files from legacy FTP clients throughout the day. Each file must be processed immediately after arrival. Processing lasts 4 to 9 minutes, and the source object must be deleted only after successful completion. The company wants minimal server management and no material client changes. Which solution is most operationally efficient? Option A. Run an FTP server on EC2, store files on EBS, and invoke an AWS batch job on a nightly schedule. Option B. Run an FTP server on EC2, archive uploads in Glacier Flexible Retrieval, and process them overnight. Option C. Use AWS Transfer Family with Amazon S3, invoke a Lambda function from each S3 event, and delete the object after successful processing. Option D. Use AWS Transfer Family with an EBS destination and invoke AWS Batch from an S3 event notification. The correct answer is C. Use AWS Transfer Family with Amazon S3, invoke a Lambda function from each S3 event, and delete the object after successful processing. Here's why. Transfer Family preserves the FTP interface and stores uploads in S3. S3 events invoke Lambda as files arrive. The runtime fits within Lambda limits, and the function can delete an object after success. Why are the other options not correct? A. EC2 management and nightly scheduling delay processing and add operational work. B. Glacier retrieval and overnight processing conflict with the immediate processing requirement. D. AWS Transfer Family uses managed storage destinations such as S3 or EFS, not an EBS volume. Exam tip. For event-driven FTP ingestion, combine Transfer Family, S3 notifications, and Lambda when processing fits Lambda limits. Question number 191. A software platform exposes one regional API gateway REST API and uses Route 53 for DNS. Each tenant must receive a secure URL such as tenant.example.com without creating a separate API or hosted zone for every tenant. Which three actions provide the most operationally efficient design? Choose 3. Option A. Create a separate Route 53 hosted zone and API endpoint for every tenant. Option B. Create a wildcard Route 53 alias record that routes tenant subdomains to the API gateway custom domain. Option C. Request the wildcard certificate in a different region from the regional API. Option D. Request a wildcard certificate in ACM in the same region as the regional API gateway custom domain. E. Deploy a distinct API gateway REST API for each tenant subdomain. F. Create an API gateway custom domain for the REST API and associate the wildcard ACM certificate. The correct answer is B. Create a wildcard Route 53 alias record that routes tenant subdomains to the API gateway custom domain. D. Request a wildcard certificate in ACM in the same region as the regional API gateway custom domain. F. Create an API gateway custom domain for the REST API and associate the wildcard ACM certificate. Here's why. A wildcard DNS record and wildcard custom domain cover tenant subdomains. A regional API gateway custom domain requires its ACM certificate in the same region, and the custom domain maps requests to the API. Why are the other options not correct? A. For tenant-hosted zones, and AP is create unnecessary administrative overhead. C. A regional custom domain requires a region-specific ACM certificate in the API region. E. A wildcard custom domain can serve the tenants without duplicating the REST API. Exam tip. Use wildcard DNS, a same region ACM certificate, and an API gateway custom domain for scalable tenant subdomains. Question number 192. A regulated team is creating an Amazon EKS cluster. Kubernetes API data, including secrets stored in EKT, must use envelope encryption with a customer-managed AWS KMS key rather than the default AWS own key. Which configuration meets the requirement? Option A. Create the cluster with default settings and install the Amazon EBS CSI driver. Option B. Store application credentials in Secrets Manager without configuring EKS API data encryption. Option C. Create a customer-managed KMS key and associate it with the EKS cluster encryption configuration. Option D. Enable default EBS volume encryption with a KMS key that uses the alias/AWS/EBS alias. The correct answer is C. Create a customer-managed KMS key and associate it with the EKS cluster encryption configuration. Here's why. Associating a customer-managed KMS key with the EKS encryption configuration makes the control plane use that key for envelope encryption of Kubernetes API data before the data is persisted in EKT. Why are the other options not correct? A. The EBS CSI driver manages workload volumes and does not select the key used for control plane EKT data. B. Secrets Manager is a separate secret store and does not configure encryption for objects stored through the Kubernetes API. D. EBS account encryption protects EBS volumes, not the managed EKS control plane data store. Exam tip. Use an EKS encryption configuration when compliance requires a customer-managed KMS key for Kubernetes API data. Question number 193. An online marketplace runs across 3 availability zones. Its web tier consists of one EC2 instance that stores user sessions locally, and its MySQL database also runs on one EC2 instance. Traffic can rise sharply. The company needs horizontal scaling and removal of zonal single points of failure without redesigning the relational data model. Which solution meets these requirements? Option A. Use a single availability zone RDS for MySQL DB instance, highly available RedISS, and a 3 availability zone auto-scaling group. Option B. Move the relational workload to DynamoDB, add DAX, and store all sessions in DynamoDB. Option C. Use an RDS for MySQL multi-availability zone DB cluster, Memcake for durable session state, and a 3 availability zone auto-scaling group. Option D. Use an RDS for MySQL multi-availability zone DB cluster, highly available elastic cache for RedISS, and a web auto-scaling group across 3 availability zones. The correct answer is D. Use an RDS for MySQL multi-availability zone DB cluster, highly available elastic cache for RedISS, and a web auto-scaling group across 3 availability zones. Here's why. The multi-availability zone DB cluster provides resilient relational storage, RedISS externalizes sessions with replication, and the auto-scaling group distributes stateless web capacity across all 3 availability zones. Why are the other options not correct? A. The single availability zone database remains a zonal failure point. B. Replacing MySQL with DynamoDB requires a substantial data and application redesign. C. Memcached does not provide the replication and failover characteristics required for highly available session state. Exam tip. Make web tiers stateless, externalize sessions to a highly available store, and use multi-availability zone databases. Question number 194. A sports broadcaster delivers streams through CloudFront and will launch a new event package in a small set of countries before expanding it. Requests originating outside the currently approved countries must be denied at the distribution. Which solution directly enforces the rollout plan? Option A. Issue time-limited CloudFront signed URLs for the event package. Option B. Configure a CloudFront geographic restriction allow list and return a custom error response to blocked countries. Option C. Encrypt the media objects before placing them behind the distribution. Option D. Use signed cookies to authorize viewers without evaluating their country. The correct answer is B. Configure a CloudFront geographic restriction allow list and return a custom error response to blocked countries. Here's why. A CloudFront geographic allow list permits delivery only to specified countries and rejects requests from other locations, which directly supports phased country-by-country availability. Why are the other options not correct? A. Signed URLs control authorization and expiration, but do not impose country restrictions. C. Encryption protects content confidentiality, but does not determine where CloudFront may deliver it. D. Signed cookies authorize access to content groups, but do not enforce geographic rollout boundaries. Exam tip. Use CloudFront geographic restrictions when access decisions are based on the viewer country. Question number 195. A security team must investigate IAM-related access denied and unauthorized operation events across an account. CloudTrail trails already deliver log files to Amazon S3. The team wants an ad hoc query solution with no analytics cluster or custom processing framework. Which solution requires the least effort? Option A. Write AWS Glue ETL scripts that scan every CloudTrail object for error text. Option B. Run custom log parsing jobs through AWS Batch. Option C. Load the raw logs into QuickSight and use dashboards as the primary query engine. Option D. Create an Amazon Athena table for the CloudTrail logs and query the relevant error codes with SQL. The correct answer is D. Create an Amazon Athena table for the CloudTrail logs and query the relevant error codes with SQL. Here's why. Athena performs serverless SQL queries directly against CloudTrail JSON logs in S3, allowing the team to filter authorization errors without provisioning compute infrastructure. Why are the other options not correct? A. Glue ETL jobs add code and job orchestration for a straightforward interactive query. B. AWS Batch is intended for managed batch compute, not direct serverless SQL analysis of S3 logs. C. QuickSight visualizes prepared datasets, but is not the direct query service for raw CloudTrail objects. Exam tip. Use Athena for ad hoc SQL analysis of CloudTrail logs stored in Amazon S3. Question number 196. A subscription platform currently runs web and application auto-scaling groups in one AWS region and stores data in Aurora. The company is expanding internationally and wants the service to survive a complete regional outage with minimal downtime. Which design provides the most fault tolerance? Option A. Create one cross-region Aurora replica, but leave both application tiers only in the primary region. Option B. Stretch the existing auto-scaling groups across availability zones located in two AWS regions. Option C. Deploy complete web and application tiers in a second region. Add an Aurora Global Database secondary cluster. Use Route 53 health check failover, and promote the secondary when required. Option D. Create an independent Aurora database in the second region and replicate it with AWS DMS. The correct answer is C. Deploy complete web and application tiers in a second region. Add an Aurora Global Database secondary cluster. use Route 53 health check failover, and promote the secondary when required. Here's why. A complete standby stack removes regional dependencies in the compute tiers. Aurora Global Database provides native cross-region replication, and Route 53 can redirect traffic before database promotion. Why are the other options not correct? A database replica alone does not restore application capacity when the primary region is unavailable. B. An autoscaling group is a regional resource and cannot span regions. D. Independent databases with DMS add operations and do not provide the native Aurora Global failover architecture. Exam tip. Regional disaster tolerance requires both a complete application stack and replicated data in the recovery region. Question number 197. A logistics partner sends an HTTPS webhook whenever a new dataset is ready. A Lambda function already contains the retrieval logic, and the company needs a dedicated public endpoint that invokes only this function with the fewest additional services. Which solution is most operationally efficient? Option A. Enable a Lambda function URL and provide the HTTPS endpoint to the partner. Option B. Deploy an internet-facing application load balancer with the Lambda function as a target. Option C. Provide the partner with the host name of an SQSQ connected to the function. Option D. Provide the partner with the host name of an SNS topic subscribed to the function. The correct answer is A. Enable a Lambda function URL and provide the HTTPS endpoint to the partner. Here's why. A Lambda function URL supplies a dedicated HTTPS endpoint that directly invokes the function, avoiding the networking, listener, queue, or topic configuration of the alternatives. Why are the other options not correct? B. An ALB adds VPC resources, configuration, and ongoing cost for a single function webhook. C. SQS is accessed through authenticated AWS APIs and is not a generic public webhook endpoint. D. An SNS topic does not expose an unauthenticated public hostname that a third party can call as a webhook. Exam tip. Use a Lambda function URL for a simple dedicated HTTPS endpoint when full API management is unnecessary. Question number 198. A healthcare organization discovered regulated personal data in several S3 objects. It needs an AWS managed service to continuously identify sensitive data findings and automatically alert the security team through their existing email and SMS subscriptions. Which solution meets the requirement? Option A. Use guard duty findings with EventBridge and send matching events to an SQSQ. Option B. Use Amazon May-C, match sensitive data findings with EventBridge and route them to an SNS topic. Option C. Use May-C and place all findings only in an SQSQ for direct notification of people. Option D. Use guard duty critical severity findings and publish them to an SNS topic. The correct answer is B. Use Amazon May-C, match sensitive data findings with EventBridge, and route them to an SNS topic. Here's why. May-C analyzes S3 objects for sensitive data such as PI. EventBridge can match May-C finding events, and SNS can fan out notifications to subscribed security personnel. Why are the other options not correct? A. Guard duty detects threats and anomalous behavior rather than classifying PI inside S3 objects. C. SQS is a message buffer and does not directly deliver email or SMS notifications to a team. D. Guard duty severity does not indicate whether an S3 object contains regulated personal data. Exam tip. Use May-C for S3 sensitive data discovery and EventBridge with SNS for human notifications. Question number 199. An enterprise centralizes CloudTrail and VPC flow logs from many accounts in one S3 bucket. Analysts query the logs frequently for the first 30 days. The logs then serve only as backup for another 60 days and must be deleted when they reach 90 days of age. Which lifecycle design is most cost-effective? Option A. Keep the logs in S3 standard for all 90 days and expire them afterward. Option B. Move the logs to S3 standard IA after 30 days, transition them to Glacier flexible retrieval at day 90, and expire them at day 90. Option C. Keep the logs in S3 standard for 30 days, transition them to S3 Glacier Flexible Retrieval, and expire them at day 90. Option D. Move the logs to S3 One Zone IA after 30 days, transition them to Glacier Flexible Retrieval at day 90, and expire them at day 90. The correct answer is C. Keep the logs in S3 standard for 30 days, transition them to S3 Glacier Flexible Retrieval, and expire them at day 90. Here's why. S3 standard supports the frequent analysis period. A day 30 transition to Glacier Flexible Retrieval reduces storage cost for the backup-only period, and expiration removes the logs at day 90. Why are the other options not correct? A. S3 standard is unnecessarily expensive during the 60-day backup-only period. B. The Glacier transition occurs at the same time as expiration and therefore provides no archive period. D. One Zone IA provides lower resilience, and its Glacier transition also occurs only when the objects expire. Exam tip. Align S3 lifecycle transitions with the point when access changes from frequent analysis to backup-only retention. Question number 200. A research group needs near real-time, read-only access to a production RDS for PostgreSQL database for complex analytical queries. The existing database is single availability zone. Reporting must not overload the writer, and the new design must be highly available at the lowest practical instance count. Which solution should be selected? Option A. Convert to an RDS for PostgreSQL multi-availability zone DB cluster and give analysts the cluster reader endpoint. Option B. Increase the size of the single availability zone production DB instance and run all reports on the writer. Option C. Use a traditional multi-availability zone DB instance and direct analysts to its standby instance. Option D. Use a traditional multi-availability zone DB instance and add 2 separate read replicas for reporting. The correct answer is A. Convert to an RDS for PostgreSQL multi-availability zone DB cluster and give analysts the cluster reader endpoint. Here's why. An RDS multi-availability zone DB cluster has 1 writer and 2 readable instances in separate availability zones. The reader endpoint distributes analytical reads while the cluster provides automatic failover. Why are the other options not correct? B. Scaling one single availability zone writer neither isolates reporting nor provides high availability. C. The standby in a traditional multi-availability zone DB instance deployment cannot serve read traffic. D. The design is functional but uses more independently managed DB instances than the multi-availability zone DB cluster. Exam tip. Use an RDS multi-availability zone DB cluster when both automatic failover and readable standby capacity are required. Question number 201. A company is migrating an Oracle transactional database from its data center. The AWS design must provide managed high availability and a separate read-only target for reporting without converting the database engine. Assume the required Oracle Enterprise Edition and Active Data Guard licenses are available. Which solution is the most operationally efficient? Option A. Deploy RDS for Oracle in one availability zone and create a read-only replica for reports. Option B. Deploy RDS for Oracle as a multi-availability zone DB instance and send reports to the synchronous standby. Option C. Convert the database to Aurora PostgreSQL and send reports to Aurora replicas. Option D. Deploy RDS for Oracle as a multi-availability zone DB instance and create a separate read-only Oracle Data Guard replica for reporting. The correct answer is D. Deploy RDS for Oracle as a multi-availability zone DB instance and create a separate read-only Oracle Data Guard replica for reporting. Here's why. The multi-availability zone DB instance provides managed synchronous standby failover, while a separate Oracle Data Guard replica in read-only mode can offload reporting from the primary database. Why are the other options not correct? A. A single availability zone source does not meet the high availability requirement. B. The standby in an RDS multi-availability zone DB instance deployment is not available for reporting queries. C. Aurora is not Oracle compatible and requires database and application conversion. Exam tip. For RDS for Oracle, Use multi-availability zone for failover and a separate licensed read-only replica for reporting. Question number 202. A membership website has unpredictable demand and may receive no requests for long periods. Only paid subscribers may sign in. The company wants a managed front-end and a back-end that incurs minimal idle cost. Which three components form the most cost-effective architecture? Choose 3. Option A. Use API gateway with Lambda functions that read subscriber records from DynamoDB. Option B. Run an ECS service, application load balancer, and RDS database continuously for the backend. Option C. Use an Amazon Cognito user pool for subscriber registration and authentication. Option D. Use only a Cognito identity pool as the user directory and sign-in service. E. Host PHP code through S3 static website hosting and deliver it with CloudFront. F. Host the frontend with AWS Amplify hosting and its managed CloudFront delivery. The correct answer is A. Use API gateway with Lambda functions that read subscriber records from DynamoDB. C. Use an Amazon Cognito user pool for subscriber registration and authentication. F. Host the frontend with AWS Amplify hosting and its managed CloudFront delivery. Here's why. API gateway, Lambda, and DynamoDB scale with requests and minimize idle infrastructure cost. Cognito user pools provide application sign-in, and Amplify hosting manages static front-end deployment and delivery. Why are the other options not correct? B. Always running containers, a load balancer, and RDS create ongoing cost during idle periods. D. Identity pools primarily provide temporary AWS credentials and are not the primary user directory sign-in choice. E. S3 static website hosting cannot execute PHP server-side code. Exam tip. For sporadic authenticated web workloads, combine a serverless API, Cognito user pools, and manage static hosting. Question number 203. A media service stores private rental files in S3 and distributes them through CloudFront. A paying customer should receive temporary access to one specific movie or download, while direct access to the S3 origin remains blocked. Which solution provides the required viewer authorization? Option A. Use S3 signed cookies for each paying customer. Option B. Generate a CloudFront signed URL for the individual object and customer. Option C. Use CloudFront origin access control as the only premium customer authorization mechanism. Option D. Enable CloudFront field-level encryption to reject users without a subscription. The correct answer is B. Generate a CloudFront signed URL for the individual object and customer. Here's why. A CloudFront signed URL grants time-limited access to one private object, which matches an individual rental or download. Origin access controls can continue preventing direct S3 access. Why are the other options not correct? A. Signed cookies are a CloudFront feature, not an S3 feature, and are generally used for groups of files. C. OAC secures the origin but does not determine which viewers are premium customers. D. Field-level encryption protects selected request fields and does not authorize content viewers. Exam tip. Use CloudFront signed URLs for individual private objects and signed cookies when access covers multiple files. Question number 204. Several standalone AWS accounts are billed separately. One account owns an underutilized savings plan, and the company wants eligible compute usage in the other accounts to consume the unused commitment. Which two actions are required? Choose 2. Option A. Create a new payer account, create an organization there, and move the savings plan owner into it. Option B. Create an AWS organization from the account that owns the savings plan and invite the other accounts. Option C. Share the savings plan with the other accounts by using AWS Resource Access Manager. Option D. From the organization management account, activate savings plans discount sharing and billing preferences. E. Enable organization-wide sharing only from the standalone account page of each invited member account. The correct answer is B. Create an AWS organization from the account that owns the savings plan and invite the other accounts. D. From the Organization Management account, activate Savings Plans discount sharing and billing preferences. Here's why. Savings plans benefits are shared only within the organization where the plan was purchased. The owner account can become the management account, invite the other accounts, and activate discount sharing. Why are the other options not correct? A. A separate payer organization would place the purchased plan outside the organization where it must apply. C. Savings plans are billing commitments and are not resources shared through AWS RAM. E. The organization management account controls the discount sharing preferences. Exam tip. Savings plans sharing requires one AWS organization and management account billing preferences. AWS RAM is not involved. Question number 205. A retailer exposes public REST APIs through a regional API gateway custom domain. A new API version must be tested with a small portion of real production traffic before full release, and the rollout must minimize customer impact and rollback risk. Which deployment approach should be used? Option A. Overwrite the production API definition and deploy it immediately to the production stage. Option B. Create a second custom domain and switch the Route 53 alias to the new API in one DNS cutover. Option C. Create an API gateway canary release, route a controlled percentage of stage traffic to it, and promote it after validation. Option D. Merge the new OpenAPI definition directly into the production API and expose it to all callers. The correct answer is C. Create an API gateway canary release, route a controlled percentage of stage traffic to it, and promote it after validation. Here's why. An API gateway canary release shifts a selected percentage of production stage traffic to the new deployment. The team can observe results, roll back quickly, and then promote the release. Why are the other options not correct? A. An immediate override exposes every customer and can remove existing API definitions. B. A DNS cutover does not provide controlled percentage-based validation and introduces propagation behavior. D. A direct production merge sends all requests to the change deployment without gradual verification. Exam tip. Use API gateway canary releases for gradual production validation and low-risk promotion. Question number 206. An audit system writes 50 kilobytes reports to S3. Reports are accessed frequently for 7 days, retained for several years, and may take up to 6 hours to restore. A new lifecycle configuration will be created under current S3 small object transition behavior. Which solution is most cost-effective? Option A. Store reports in S3 standard for 7 days. Then use a lifecycle rule with an explicit object size filter that permits the 50 kilobytes objects to transition to S3 Glacier flexible retrieval. Option B. Transition the reports from S3 standard to S3 standard IA after 7 days. Option C. Use S3 intelligent tiering and rely on automatic archive movement for the 50 kilobytes reports. Option D. Transition the reports to S3 Glacier Deep Archive after 7 days. The correct answer is A. Store reports in S3 standard for 7 days. Then use a lifecycle rule with an explicit object size filter that permits the 50 kilobytes objects to transition to S3 Glacier flexible retrieval. Here's why. Glacier flexible retrieval provides multi-year archive economics and standard retrieval in roughly 3 to 5 hours. The explicit size filter is necessary because new lifecycle configurations do not transition objects smaller than 128 kilobytes by default. Why are the other options not correct? B. S3 lifecycle does not transition objects to standard IA before they have spent at least 30 days in S3. C. Objects smaller than 128 kilobytes are not monitored or automatically tiered by S3 intelligent tiering. D. Glacier Deep Archive standard retrieval generally exceeds the 6-hour requirement. Exam tip. For small S3 objects, account for lifecycle size filters, minimum transition age, and archive retrieval time. Question number 207. A software company receives steady EC2 usage but changes instance families, sizes, operating systems, and regions every few months. It wants a 1-year discount commitment without paying the commitment up front and without locking the discount to one EC2 family. Which purchase option should the company select? Option A. Purchase a 3-year partial upfront reserved instance. Option B. Purchase a 1-year all upfront reserved instance. Option C. Purchase a 1-year all upfront EC2 instance savings plan. Option D. Purchase a 1-year no upfront compute savings plan. The correct answer is D. Purchase a 1-year no upfront compute savings plan. Here's why. A compute savings plan follows eligible compute usage across EC2 families, sizes, operating systems, and regions, while the no upfront option avoids an initial payment. Why are the other options not correct? A. A 3-year reserved instance is a longer and less flexible commitment than required. B. Reserved instances are tied more closely to EC2 configuration attributes and require full upfront payment here. C. EC2 instance savings plans are restricted to one instance family in one region, and this option is upfront. Exam tip. Choose compute savings plans when the compute family, region, or service may change during the commitment. Question number 208. Linux application servers run in 2 availability zones and require 1 shared hierarchical namespace. Every instance must concurrently read and write files with standard file system semantics, and the storage must remain accessible across both zones. Which storage solution should be used? Option A. Store the files as objects in one S3 bucket and treat object keys as a mounted directory tree. Option B. Create an Amazon EFS file system and mount it on every EC2 instance. Option C. Multi-attach one IO2 EBS volume to instances in both availability zones. Option D. Attach separate EBS volumes to every instance and periodically synchronize their contents. The correct answer is B. Create an Amazon EFS file system and mount it on every EC2 instance. Here's why. Amazon EFS provides a regional NFS file system with a hierarchical namespace and concurrent access from multiple Linux EC2 instances in different availability zones. Why are the other options not correct? A. S3 is object storage and does not provide native shared POSIX file system behavior. C. EBS multi-attach is limited to compatible instances in the same availability zone. D. Synchronizing independent volumes does not provide one immediately consistent concurrent file system. Exam tip. Use EFS for shared Linux file access across multiple instances and availability zones. Question number 209. A reporting workload predictably runs every Friday night. The EC2 fleet must remain at 2 instances most of the week and increase to 6 instances before the weekly job starts, then return to normal capacity afterward with no recurring manual action. Which solution has the least operational overhead? Option A. Send an event bridge reminder to an administrator before each Friday workload. Option B. Manually edit the desired capacity of an auto-scaling group every week. Option C. Configure recurring scheduled actions on an EC2 auto-scaling group for scale-out and scale-in. Option D. Use only metric-based dynamic scaling and wait for the Friday workload to raise utilization. The correct answer is C. Configure recurring scheduled actions on an EC2 auto-scaling group for scale-out and scale-in. Here's why. Recurring scheduled actions change auto-scaling capacity before and after the known weekly demand, meeting the predictable schedule without human intervention or delayed metric reaction. Why are the other options not correct? A. A reminder still depends on a person or additional automation to change capacity. B. Manual scaling creates recurring work and risks a missed adjustment. D. Dynamic scaling reacts after metrics change. Scheduled scaling is more direct for known recurring demand. Exam tip. Use scheduled scaling for predictable recurring load and metric-based scaling for unplanned variation. Question number 210. A company is publishing an Amazon API Gateway REST API. Clients must negotiate TLS 1.3 only, and the server certificate must be issued by a specific public third-party certificate authority. Which configuration meets both requirements? Option A. Request an ACM public certificate and choose the required external CA as the issuer. Option B. Obtain the certificate from the required CA import it into ACM, associate it with a REST API custom domain, and select the security policy _TLS 13_3_2025-09 policy with strict endpoint access. Option C. Import the third-party certificate into ACM and associate it with an API gateway HTTP API custom domain. Option D. Attach the imported certificate directly to a Lambda function URL that implements the REST API. The correct answer is B. Obtain the certificate from the required CA, import it into ACM, associate it with a REST API custom domain, and select the security policy _TLS 13_3_2025-09 policy with strict endpoint access. Here's why. ACM can store an externally issued certificate for an API gateway custom domain. REST APIs support the enhanced TLS 1.3 only security policy, which rejects TLS 1.2 and earlier connections. Why are the other options not correct? A. ACM-issued public certificates use Amazon-controlled certificate authorities. Customers cannot select an arbitrary issuer. C. API Gateway HTTP APIs support the TLS_1_2 security policy, not the REST API enhanced TLS 1.3 only policy. D. Lambda function URLs do not support attaching a customer-selected TLS certificate. Exam tip. Import a certificate when a specific CA is mandatory, and use a REST API enhanced security policy for TLS 1.3 only access. Question number 211. A media analytics company exposes a public REST API through Amazon API Gateway and AWS Lambda. Customers call the API from many continents, and most clients are not concentrated near the AWS region that hosts the API. The company wants API Gateway to use AWS edge locations to reduce connection latency without building a separate content distribution layer. Which endpoint type should the company select? Option A. A private API endpoint accessible through interface VPC endpoints. Option B. An edge-optimized API endpoint. Option C. A regional API endpoint. Option D. An interface VPC endpoint for the API Gateway service. The correct answer is B. An edge-optimized API endpoint. Here's why. An edge-optimized REST API uses an AWS-managed CloudFront distribution, so geographically dispersed clients enter through nearby edge locations before traffic reaches the regional API. Why are the other options not correct? A. A private endpoint restricts access to VPC-based clients and is not intended for a public global audience. C. A regional endpoint sends clients directly to the API region unless the company builds its own edge layer. D. An interface endpoint provides private connectivity to a private API. It is not an API endpoint type for global acceleration. Exam tip. Choose an edge-optimized REST API when public callers are globally distributed, and API Gateway should provide the edge layer. Question number 212. A training platform uses an Amazon RDS for Postgres QLDB instance only from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. on weekdays. The database can remain stopped overnight and on weekends. The company wants to eliminate idle compute charges through a reusable AWS-supported scheduling solution rather than maintaining custom code. Which approach best meets the requirement? Option A. Disable automated backups and create one manual snapshot every Friday. Option B. Buy an all-upfront reserved DB instance for the database. Option C. Invoke a custom Lambda function whenever average database CPU falls below a threshold. Option D. Deploy instance scheduler on AWS and define recurring start and stop periods for the DB instance. The correct answer is D. Deploy instance scheduler on AWS and define recurring start and stop periods for the DB instance. Here's why. Instance scheduler on AWS can apply recurring schedules to supported RDS DB instances, stopping the database during predictable idle periods and starting it before users return. Why are the other options not correct? A. Removing automated backups reduces recoverability and does not stop database compute charges. B. A reserved commitment charges for the purchase term and does not eliminate the cost of unused hours. C. CPU utilization does not reliably represent the business schedule and custom code adds maintenance. Exam tip. Schedule periodic RDS workloads to stop during known idle windows when the engine and operational requirements permit it. Question number 213. A ticketing service invokes Java 11 Lambda functions in response to events. Traffic is irregular, and the team wants fewer cold start outliers when new execution environments are created. The application does not require continuously pre-initialized capacity, and cost is more important than guaranteeing a fixed startup latency. Which configuration is most cost-effective? Option A. Enable AWS Lambda Snap Start for the published function versions. Option B. Increase the function timeout to the maximum allowed value. Option C. Allocate substantially more memory to every invocation. Option D. Configure provision concurrency for all expected peak traffic. The correct answer is A. Enable AWS Lambda Snap Start for the published function versions. Here's why. Snap Start creates and caches an initialized snapshot for supported Java functions and restores new execution environments from that snapshot, reducing cold starts without continuously paying for provision concurrency. Why are the other options not correct? B. Timeout controls how long an invocation may run and does not accelerate initialization. C. Additional memory can increase CPU allocation but is not the most direct or consistently economical cold start solution. D. Provision concurrency provides predictable initialization behavior but adds charges for reserved initialized capacity. Exam tip. Use SnapStart for economical cold start reduction on supported runtimes. Use provision concurrency when strict, predictable startup latency is mandatory. Question number 214. A manufacturing control application runs in an EC2 auto-scaling group across two availability zones. Business policy requires that at least two non-interruptible application instances remain available even if either availability zone becomes unavailable. Which capacity design satisfies the requirement? Option A. Set the minimum capacity to 2 and place one on-demand instance in each availability zone. Option B. Set the minimum capacity to 4 and place 2 on-demand instances in one zone and 2 spot instances in the other. Option C. Set the minimum capacity to 4 and maintain 2 on-demand instances in each availability zone. Option D. Set the minimum capacity to 2 and launch 4 spot instances in only one availability zone. The correct answer is C. Set the minimum capacity to 4 and maintain 2 on-demand instances in each availability zone. Here's why. With 2 reliable on-demand instances in each zone, the loss of either availability zone still leaves the required 2 instances operating in the surviving zone. Why are the other options not correct? A. Losing one zone leaves only one instance until replacement capacity is launched. B. Losing the on-demand zone or experiencing spot interruptions can reduce dependable capacity below 2. D. A single zone is one failure domain, and spot instances do not guarantee continuous capacity. Exam tip. To retain N instances after one of 2 availability zones fails, provision at least N dependable instances in each zone. Question number 215. A SaaS platform runs on Amazon EKS and requires a PostgreSQL-compatible database in one AWS region. The database must fail over automatically across availability zones, and the application must be able to direct read-only queries to additional database capacity. The company wants a managed solution with minimal administration. Which database architecture should be used? Option A. An RDS for PostgreSQL multi-availability zone DB instance deployment with one non-readable standby. Option B. An RDS for PostgreSQL multi-availability zone DB cluster deployment. Option C. An RDS for PostgreSQL primary with cross-region read replicas. Option D. A DynamoDB global table. The correct answer is B. An RDS for PostgreSQL multi-availability zone DB cluster deployment. Here's why. An RDS multi-availability zone DB cluster provides a writer and two readable DB instances in separate availability zones, combining automatic failover with regional read capacity. Why are the other options not correct? A. A traditional multi-availability zone DB instance standby is maintained for failover and does not serve application reads. C. Cross-region replicas add inter-region cost and complexity when the requirement is regional. D. DynamoDB is not compatible with a PostgreSQL relational workload. Exam tip. Use an RDS multi-availability zone DB cluster when a supported engine needs both multi-availability zone resilience and readable standby capacity. You have completed Part 6 of the SAA-C03 practice series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.